From Quito, Ecuador, my name is Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South, the midday news brief from Telesur English. And we begin this edition right now. We begin in Russia, where Venezuela has signed a deal to restructure $3.15 billion of its debt, a crucial step in its move to refinance its obligations. The agreement was announced on Sunday and has now been formalized in Moscow by the Vice President for Economic Affairs, Wilmar Castro, and the Finance Minister, Simón Serpa.
The
new profile of this debt will certainly provide two fundamental things. The first of them to satisfy a set of needs that the Venezuelan people require, and secondly, to get back to the commercial exchange that we had with Russia in the first years of our commercial relations. It is an agreement of political and financial transcendence, which reflects the results of the great battle of Comandante Chavez. From the beginning of his government, proposing the formation of a multipolar world in which President Putin, from the beginning of the administration of President Chavez, also supported.
So let's take a look at what this deal with Russia involves. Venezuela owes Russia $3.15 billion in sovereign debt. Payments on this debt will now be rescheduled over 10 years. In the first 6 years, Venezuela will have very little to pay. Debts owed to Russia by PDVSA, Venezuela's state oil company, are not included in this deal. They will be dealt with separately. At the same time, PDVSA says it has now made the interest payments due on its bond. It was the alleged non-payment of these debts that was cited on Wednesday by the ratings agency Standard & Poor's to declare Venezuela in selective default. On its Twitter account, the state oil company said, "We inform that the payment of interest on the PDVSA 2027 bond has been completed, and we clarified to the financial markets that capital payments on the PDVSA 2017 and 2020 bonds have also been made successfully." In Venezuela, people are raising their voices against the sanctions approved on Monday by the European Union. The Venezuelan government described them as illegal and absurd. More details in the next report.
In a meeting with diplomatic representatives of the European Union, the Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arias spoke in the name of his government and the Venezuelan people. He condemned the sanctions approved by the EU against Venezuela, sanctions that include an arms embargo and a list still to be filled in of senior officials to be targeted.
We can't import public order equipment from European countries, which they say is for repression. My goodness, why didn't they apply that restriction to an EU member country that just a few days ago used anti-riot equipment to stop people from voting and even ran off with the ballot boxes?
The foreign minister said it was curious that this round of sanctions came at the same time as Venezuela was meeting with its bondholders to restructure its debt.
And
precisely
that day, those bondholders got the news on their phones saying sanctions from the European Union, which affects our dialogue, which affects Venezuela.
So the Venezuelan government has raised its voice, but so have the Venezuelan people, who say those sanctions are against themselves.
With sanctions against ministers, they are not just affecting them, they are hurting the Venezuelan people, limiting our access to food, to medicine, and trying to make us angry so that we protest against our president.
The European arms embargo follows one approved a decade ago by the United States. According to analysts, the objective is to weaken Venezuelan military and pave the way for the United States to recover its control in the region, given the growing influence of China and Russia.
This is what the U.S. has always done. First, they develop a whole military encirclement against a country they're thinking of invading, which is what they did in Iraq, for example. They had 4 years of blockade, and when the country had no capacity to resist, they invaded.
The National Constituent Assembly called these European sanctions absurd and lamented that the European Union had submitted to the interventionist priorities of Washington. The Venezuelan government reserved the right to take its own concrete actions in response.
And the United States sanctions against Venezuela are having a negative impact on the Jamaican economy, according to the government there. A report in the Jamaica Observer quotes the Minister of Energy, Andrew Whitley, saying that Jamaica has not been receiving from Venezuela the amount of crude oil it usually receives under the Petrocaribe agreement. Whitley told Parliament that Jamaica's only refinery, Petrojam, was having to rely on crude from Trinidad and Tobago. As we heard, all this is happening as the Venezuelan government hopes to resume dialogue with the opposition, at talks scheduled to take place this Wednesday in the Dominican Republic. Luis Florido, chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the opposition-controlled National Assembly, said that more than 100 deputies from the Mood coalition support the dialogue with the government. However, he also said they will not participate in this new round of talks. The Venezuelan Minister of Communications, Jorge Rodriguez, said the government is working on a draft agreement for the talks. Our correspondent Regan Devins joins us now live from Caracas. Hello, Regan. Hello, Regan.
Hi, Carla.
Yes, so can you tell us?
Hi, Carla. I hope you guys can hear me. Yes. Right now, today, I'm sorry? A delegation led by Jorge Rodriguez will be heading to the Dominican Republic to resume talks, is what they're saying. However, Luis Florido, a deputy, a lawmaker from the National Assembly, opposition-led National Assembly, and part of the Mud Coalition, says his group, the Mud Coalition, will not attend. And they're saying this time they will not attend, presumably because no foreign leaders have been invited. Previously, we've seen foreign leaders mediate these international dialogue processes, such as Danilo Mendez from Dominica, the Dominican Republic, as well as former Spanish leader Luis Zapatero. So we're not exactly certain who is present at the meeting in the Dominican Republic today, but they said that they will not attend. We're not exactly certain what is the current state of the Mud Coalition. For example, today Richard Blanco, one of the Mud Coalition members, he's from the party Alianza al Bravo Pueblo, says that the Mud Coalition has not met to discuss the political situation in Venezuela for some 8 months. So we're getting quite a few different messages out of the Mud Coalition. Some are for dialogue, others against, some are for intervention. Obviously, there are those against, and some are mixing and matching different issues that they want to champion for or against Venezuela. So it still shows fractured Venezuelan opposition. Carla.
Thank you, Regan, for your report. That was Regan Devins, our correspondent from Venezuela. So we'll be coming back with more news in a minute. Stay with us. Bolivia's President Evo Morales has condemned Amazon Log 2017, the military exercises in the Brazilian Amazon that were supported by some Latin American governments and the United States. Morales lamented the fact that some South American armies are inviting the United States for bilateral military operations. The countries that are supporting these exercises are deceiving their people, said Morales. Also, in Cuba, the country is hosting an online forum of experts to discuss the alleged sonic attacks, which the United States said left a number of its diplomats in Havana with health problems. An investigation by the Cuban government concluded that there was no evidence that these attacks had ever happened. Laura Prada has more from Havana.
Hello, yes, indeed. Today started an online debate forum to exchange with scientists and international community what happened which were the source of the events, of the alleged acoustic attacks that happened here in Havana to U.S. diplomats. This debate will be held with the committee of scientists, the Cuban scientists who investigated the occurrence of this event. Let's remember that these scientists did not have access to the medical evidence that U.S. authorities used to incriminate Cuban government. This debate can be followed on the link supuestosataques.redciencia.cu, alleged attacks.cubanredscience.cu. This is all I have for now. We'll keep in touch.
Thank you. That was Laura Prada from Havana. The Colombian Constitutional Court has ruled that the special jurisdiction for peace does respect the country's constitution. Although some changes have been made, President Juan Manuel Santos explained that Congress now has the responsibility of approving the law that regulates the jurisdiction.
Now we have to approve important measures to develop the peace agreements. Congress has to take responsibility with this major task, especially regarding the law that regulates the special jurisdiction for peace, which is the key element to the peace agreement and what guarantees the victims' rights, justice, truth, and most of all, to prevent this from happening again. These crimes will not go unpunished. Approving these laws is a responsibility that we have with the victims.
Another social leader has been assassinated in the south of Colombia, Jenny Montano. She was shot on Sunday in the Tumaco region, which saw a massacre of campesinos last month. Our correspondent Natalia Margarita is in the region and filled the report.
Here in Tumaco, located in the Pacific of Colombia, violence continued threatening the life of social activists. The last victim was Luz Jenny Montaño, a 48-year-old woman who was part of the local councils, local community boards, and she was known for advocating for victims' rights and also social leaders' rights. This latest murder of Luz Jenny Montaño comes right after a big demonstration took place in the city of Pasto, which is the capital of this department of Nariño. During these demonstrations, social leaders were precisely demanding guarantees of security guarantees for social leaders, not just here in the department of Nariño, but in general in Colombia. Also, it is important to remember that this murder comes weeks after another very renowned social leader here in Nariño, nearby Tumaco, was also murdered. Jair Cortés. He was member of the local councils of the rural areas of Tumaco. Jair also was one of the first leaders who denounced the recent massacre of farmers, of campesinos that took place also here in the rural areas of Tumaco. Let's remember that at least 9 campesinos were killed during this recent massacre, known by now as the massacre of Tumaco. In general, in Colombia, social organizations have been denouncing the lack of guarantees for social leaders. Let's remember that at least 130 social leaders have been murdered here in Colombia in this 2017.
Natalia Margarita from Colombia. Ecuador's Vice President Jorge Glass and 12 others have been formally indicted for unlawful association in the corruption case involving the Brazilian construction company Odebrecht. Prosecutors say Glass was linked to a total of $13.5 million in bribes via an uncle who is also under arrest for favoring Odebrecht in granting government contracts. Glass has repeatedly denied any wrongdoing and accused Odebrecht of deliberately smearing him.
The audience, as I have said, has come to an end once terminated. It'll pass on the file to a criminal tribunal, so what with the elements of conviction and the presented proof to the public prosecutor's office, it is the criminal tribunal that will impose the sentence that corresponds.
Marcelo Odebrecht, the jailed former head of the Brazilian construction giant Odebrecht, has told prosecutors that the company hired Peruvian President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski to work as a consultant a decade ago. According to local media reports, in a meeting last week in Curitiba, Brazil, Odebrecht said the company hired Kuczynski to mend ties with him after he had opposed highway contracts awarded to Odebrecht in 2005, when Kuczynski served in the government of former President Alejandro Toledo. Peru's President Pedro Pardo Kuczynski categorically denied the newspaper report, alleging the Brazilian construction giant Odebrecht hired him as a consultant and financed his presidential campaigns. The president said via Twitter, "I never received any contribution from Odebrecht from my 2011 and 2016 election campaigns, nor have I had professional links with Odebrecht. I'm absolutely sure of my acts. Let's leave our prosecution and judicial authorities to work with autonomy, independence, and free from political pressures." An urgent public health crisis is crippling Lima, Peru, because many pharmacies are running out of medicine and supplies. The providers are saying the recent concerns an outstanding debt with the government.
We took a medical prescription and went to the pharmacy of the Children's Hospital in Lima to get some basic medicine, such as sulcrate, used in treatment for gastritis and liver illnesses. We recorded the situation with a cell phone camera. I need this, please.
No.
Don't you have it? There is something else in that prescription.
We don't have it either. We ran out of all of this.
The shortage of medicine in Lima is getting worse every day. According to Lima's Chamber of Commerce, the government owes almost $250 million to the providers, and some of these companies have decided to stop supplying the hospitals, affecting millions of patients.
The hospital's pharmacy never has the medicine. My son was a patient before and I had to look for everything somewhere else.
They just tell me that they don't have it.
Do you buy it at another store?
Yes.
Is there a shortage in this hospital?
Yes, it's always like this.
They tell me that they don't have medicine. What else can I do? Bad luck, I guess.
Health union members are asking the government to solve this crisis that is endangering the lives of so many patients.
The most affected patients are the ones from critical areas, the ones that need complex procedures such as heart or brain surgeries. They require bigger budgets, and in the end, the hospitals will cancel the treatments.
A public health ministry statement denied this shortage. Some of the hospital suppliers confirmed that this debt could force them into mass dismissal or lead them to bankruptcy.
The Citizen Assembly Against Corruption and Impunity in Guatemala has called a rally to demand the resignation of President Jimmy Morales. According to activist and member of the Assembly, Briseida Milian, during the rally, people would demand the resignation of representatives from the so-called Covenant of Corruption, as well as a real reform to the electoral law and political parties at the end of violent evictions in rural areas. The rally will take place this coming Thursday at midday in front of the Guatemalan Congress, as well as various plazas around the capital. Uruguayan President Tabaré Vázquez met with Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto in Mexico City as the two leaders discussed bilateral issues in an effort to consolidate trade ties. Vázquez highlighted how both countries face drug addiction, while Peña Nieto said they looked forward to updating economic ties under a free trade agreement that has existed with Uruguay since 2004. Following the meeting, the two leaders oversaw the signing of the agreement to strengthen bilateral ties in the political, economic, and cultural spheres. Honduras is getting ready to elect new authorities, and in that context, the LGBTI community is demanding more inclusion and also denouncing hate campaigns from some sectors, along with the increase of violence against this community that claimed 8 lives in recent weeks.
Members of the LGBTI community in Honduras are claiming equal rights and inclusion. They are victims of homicides, harassment, and threats, among other felonies. Statistics and testimonies prove that violence against this community has increased.
I left my house to go to the store and to get something to eat. And then when I came back, there was someone in my room. When I got in. The attack began, and I was hit and continually insulted, mistreated. I was attacked.
Human rights defenders say the impunity in the over 140 murders over the past 3 years reaches up to 98%, and that also proves the lack of support that the state gives to this community.
Respuesta ninguna.
No answer, none. We never have had an answer. There's 98% impunity in the Republic Ministry. The Public Ministry is giving permission for these violent crimes against our groups, and they keep happening. It's sad, it's painful. Everything that is happening in the country around sexual diversity.
They also affirm that they've been ignored by the proposals of presidential candidates, and the proposals actually reject diversity.
This is a call for our authorities to pay attention to this epidemic of homophobia that exists in our society, that rejection, that exclusion, and the lack of programs that should be developed by the government.
On a political level, they've made the Electoral Supreme Council to include them in the observation of the upcoming elections on November 26. Nevertheless, they say there's a lot to do still.
What's important is the recognition of the existence of the LGBT people in Honduras. Throughout history, we've been ignored in the electoral processes. We're not recognized as citizens.
Conservative sectors, including religious groups, incite homophobia. In past elections, in the next one, they asked their followers not to vote for members of the LGBT community that run for public positions.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Zimbabwe's military has seized power in the country, saying they are targeting criminals around President Robert Mugabe, but that the 93-year-old leader and his family were, quote, safe and sound. A military spokesman gave further assurance on national television that the intervention was not a coup and told citizens that the president's security was secured. Tensions between Mugabe and the military have recently intensified after several sackings, including former Vice President Emerson Mnangagwa, but who has highly expected to be Mugabe's successor. Many believe that Mugabe has been making way for his wife Grace to become vice president in preparation for her to succeed her 93-year-old husband in next year's elections. South Africa's president, who has spoken to Mugabe, said he had hoped there would not be an unconstitutional change of government.
I am hoping that the defense force will not move and do more damage, that they will be able to respect the Constitution of Zimbabwe as well as the people of Zimbabwe, so that this situation does not go beyond the situation where it is now, particularly because we are now in contact with them as well as the president. We are hoping that this situation is going to be controlled so that peace and stability comes back to Zimbabwe.
And still in Zimbabwe, where the country's opposition party, the Movement for Democratic Change, has reacted to the military seizing of power. MDC spokesperson Obert Gutu said that the government of the President Robert Mugabe had always been unsustainable and an accident waiting to happen. Gutu adds that the party had been making this case for years and said that he had hoped the situation would remain peaceful. Lebanon's President Michel Aoun has accused Saudi Arabia of holding Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri, along with his family, hostage. Aoun has called this an act of aggression. Aoun has said he will not accept Hariri's resignation until he returns to Lebanon to formally submit it and explain his reasons. Hariri has said he will return to Lebanon in the coming days.
Our Prime Minister was held in the kingdom. Communicating with him is so far limited. He can't express what he wants to say, and this is an act of aggression against Lebanon, because he has immunity as Prime Minister, and this is according to the Vienna Agreement. There is also another violation against the human rights laws. We have taken all procedures because something like this is not a resignation of a government. It is an aggression against us and our independence.
In Gaza, we have an exclusive interview with Dr. Soufiane Sultan, Minister of Agriculture for Palestine, on efforts to restore farming in the region. Noor Harasin has the report.
The Minister of Agriculture in the Palestinian Consensus Government, Dr. Soufiane Sultan, on Wednesday visited his ministry's headquarters in the besieged Gaza Strip. Mr. Sultan inspected the work process at the laboratories of the ministry and met with Mohammed Kishan, the director of the Turkish Cooperation and Humanitarian Agency, TICA, in Gaza. The minister discussed with Kishan means of developing quality projects to boost the agriculture sector in Gaza. In an exclusive interview with Telesur, Dr. Soufiane said that his ministry has developed a package of plans for the rehabilitation of the agriculture sector in the Gaza Strip.
All of us know the suffering of the agriculture sector in the Gaza Strip. The agriculture infrastructure, which has been badly destroyed during the consecutive Israeli wars on Gaza, need to be rehabilitated, again to improve this vital sector. We have a bunch of projects slated for Gaza. Some of them have already initiated a few years ago, including a project funded by the European Union for the rehabilitation of what had been destroyed by the Israeli occupation, in addition to more new projects.
The rehabilitation of the agriculture and farming sector in Gaza is of great importance to the recovery of its collapsing economy. The agricultural losses during the last Israeli war on Gaza in 2014 reached an estimated $550 million. Economic downfall in the agriculture production is not only related to the conflict with Israel and the blockade. The Israeli restrictions imposed on the agriculture imports and exports, the ground incursions targeting farmers in their fields near the buffer zone, as well as the leveling of agricultural lands by the Israeli army forces have made the situation grow even worse. Noor Harasin, Telesur TV, Gaza.
That was Noor Harasin from Gaza. We've come to the end of this midday news brief. This and many other news, you can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.